All right, you're live.
Good afternoon. I'm Gwen Whistler, and I'm the chair of the Planning and Economic Development Committee, and I'd like to welcome you to the May 9th meeting of that committee. All council members and staff are participating virtually. To help our audience follow along, I'll state each section of the agenda aloud. We're streaming live on our virtual engagement hub, which is accessible through the virtual engagement hub link on the front page of the city's website. We also have an option for the public to listen live by phone by dialing 855-925-2801 and entering the code 8187. For you, those of you out there today, welcome. For today's meeting, we have the option for people to call in and comment live during the meeting. To call in and comment live, use the same number, 855-925-2801, meeting code 8187. Your phone will be muted and you will hear the meeting live. At this point, callers will hear, for more options, please press star. Pressing *3 will allow callers to continue to listen live and join a speaker queue. If you are watching the meeting through the live stream while you are listening to the meeting by phone, please be sure to turn down the volume on your device before speaking. So now I'm going to go through and introduce the staff and city council members. If you just want to unmute your phone and give us a quick hello. And just a heads up, Councilwoman Turner will not be participating today due to another council conflict. So with that, I'll end Councilwoman Sandra Kilgore.
Good afternoon.
City Manager Deborah Campbell.
Hello.
And Lucy Crown, Planner 3 from the Transportation Planning Division.
Hello.
So, thanks. So the first is the approval of the minutes. May I get a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Okay, and I'll second. And then we have to do a roll call. So the roll call is Councilwoman Kilgore?
Aye.
And me? Aye. So the minutes are approved. All right. Okay, so basically we've got one item on the agenda today, and it's not going to require committee members' action, but it's so, I believe this is the first, no, is this the first public airing of the GAP report, Lucy, or not?
Yes.
Okay, whoa, so we get to hear it the first time out. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lucy Crown to talk to us about the GAP report and GAP update, and that stands for Greenway, ADA Transition, and Pedestrian Plans, otherwise known as GAP. Take it away, Lucy.
Thank you, Councilwoman Whistler. It's a delight to be here today. And I might have already lied on this presentation. We have been on recorded boards and commission meetings. But this is the first time that I've been to a committee of council people. And I've already, there we go. Hold on one second. Okay, now I'm on track. Yes, today we'll be talking about Close the Gap. It's a planning process that we use to create 3 different plans: the Greenway Plan, the ADA Transition Plan, and the Pedestrian Plan. And this outline will help us break down the 3 pretty complicated plans to make them easier to understand. We'll go over the important aspects of the methodology and the action plan. The key takeaways are that the GAP plans are 3 plans that we made together on purpose. The ADA accessibility within our rights of way, which is a way to say streets and greenways, is a federally acknowledged equity issue with potential legal ramifications if unaddressed. We know that pedestrian facilities are desired throughout the city, and safe pedestrian facilities are needed in neighborhoods as well as commercial corridors. In order to implement the gap, we will need to be creative with design and funding opportunities. And of course, resources are needed. So we should probably take the next year to really discuss some good funding strategies. What is the gap? That's an acronym that stands for Greenway, ADA Transition, and Pedestrian Plan. The goal of doing these three plans at the same time was to create a pedestrian network that could allow people to move without a car throughout the city. And when you layer all of our plans on top of each other, it will look like this. In the Greenway plan, we're really working hard to create a connected greenway network. Our vision is to have a greenway network that will connect all areas of the city in order to allow people to move on foot or by bike. And our prioritization goals were to define new types of greenways in order to fit them throughout the city and create that prioritization list. The ADA transition plan, we're working on existing facilities within the public right-of-way. Our goal is to have our priority pedestrian corridors to be ADA compliant to the maximum extent feasible. And our prioritization goal, again, was to find and prioritize the most urgent corridors to bring them into national compliance, and also ways to train staff and educate developers for future development to be built correctly. These are some pictures of issues that we're dealing with our sidewalk systems throughout the city that give great examples of our ADA problems. And I'm sure you've seen examples like this before. Sidewalks that are too narrow and covered with utility poles and signs that make mobility devices impossible to be able to pass through. In neighborhoods, you might see a lot of sidewalks that are very poorly maintained and falling apart, need to be completely rebuilt. And in other parts of the city, we might have walking facilities, but because they weren't built correctly, people with mobility devices are unable to use them correctly. With the pedestrian plan, we'll be focusing on new facilities in the city and how to fill the gaps in our sidewalk network. Our vision is for people in Asheville to be able to walk from their house to key destinations along a network of streets which are designed for pedestrians. And again, our prioritization goal is to identify and figure out a way to prioritize this long list of projects. When we say a pedestrian plan, it's not just sidewalks, so it has to do with pedestrian curb ramps, again an ADA issue, but on the sidewalks, as well as street crossings and access to bus stops. Going into the plan, there were some things that we knew very well. One is that our greenway network has a lot of work before it's connected, and many people say they desire greenways throughout the city. We also know the city has many places with walking facilities, but for some people, especially with disabilities, they are having a hard time using them. And we know that there's places in our cities where people need to walk, but facilities for walking are missing. So going into this plan, we knew our biggest job was to figure out how to prioritize these projects so that we can work on implementing them. So now I'll touch on a little bit of our planning process. Our public engagement and outreach was robust. We had 3 working stakeholder groups. The think tank was our internal focus group working with all the departments that would need to weigh in on greenway and sidewalk projects, everyone from public works to equity and inclusion. We also worked with our partners in the county, the MPO and the DOT in this stakeholder group. We had a citizen action committee, and that was our external facing group working with our institutions, organizations, advocacy groups, nonprofit groups, etc., that have any kind of investment on mobility through Asheville. And then the third was our ADA focus group, and that was a group of people with disabilities or their caregivers, the disabilities ranging from low vision, deafness, and then physical and cognitive disabilities. We had 3 public meetings, which was not easy during a pandemic. I remember the day we went home for 2 weeks. We thought we would be over this really fast, but turns out, and luckily for us, we had already planned to have a pretty robust online engagement portal. We have a project page, and the meetings that we did have, we recorded. They're available on our project page. We had all of our surveys online as well, and several promotional videos and smart posters and cards and things like that, which will bring people from the community centers and public places where we posted them to the sites where our surveys could be found so that they could give us public input. At this point, this is what remains of our timeline. We have a draft plan on our project page since April 1st. It's available for all the public to review and give comment. We've been showing this presentation to many boards and commissions, as well as interested groups at neighborhood meetings. In May, we'll refine the ADA transition plan, and I'll give you a few more details about that later. And then in June, we would like to come back to the PED for these updates and a motion to approve, and hopefully go to council in July for adoption of the GAP plans. Do you have any questions? Okay, I'll touch on the methodology. So we had to figure out a way to look at every street in Asheville and figure out a way to score them in order to prioritize them. And our goal was to identify the corridors in the city with the greatest need for connections and maintenance. These were the 4 criteria, and I'll detail them. The first is destination and equity score, which is to identify the essential places where people need to access in the areas of city with the greatest equity needs. This was done with census information, and we used not surprising factors in order to get to these scores. We use medium income, percentage of BIPOC community, percentage of poverty households, living in poverty, households without vehicles, people older than 65, disabilities percentages, and percentages of homes with limited English proficiency. We combine that with a destination score. So where do people need to go? We created a really long list of places we thought people needed to be able to get to easily. And with these 2 scores combined, we came up with the first criteria of the destiny and equity score. Our second criteria was a safety score. We were identifying the places in the city that are unsafe for pedestrians to walk. And when I say pedestrians and walking, I use them in air quotes because I'm talking about anyone who's in our right-of-way trying to transport without a car or bike. So our safety score is based on traffic speed, traffic volume, and number of traffic lanes on the roadway, as well as any reported pedestrian crashes. The data that we had available that was that we were the most confident in using was between the years of 2014 and 18. And the reason we're looking at the pedestrian crashes in this score is because we have a lot of pedestrian crashes in this city. We had 271 crashes in those 4 years. Some of them, sadly, were fatalities. So based on that, on the style of street, you could get up to 5 points, and then an extra point for crashes and bonus point if there was a fatality or more than 2 crashes. A quick example are these 2 photographs. This is Murdoch Avenue near Weaver Park. It's got a low speed, low volume, 2 lanes, lots of traffic calming. And the polar opposite of that would be Patton Avenue, up to 8 lanes, very hard to cross if you have any mobility issues. It's hard to cross if you're a healthy human who can run, but it has very high speeds, high volumes, and lots of lanes. Then the third criteria is connectivity score. This is identifying the roadways in Asheville that could make walking a viable form of transportation. What roads can we enhance by filling in gaps of sidewalks and upgrading our ADA facilities so that people could say, you know what, I don't really need to use a car, I can walk instead. And we were able to score them in a pretty straightforward way. And then the last criteria is public input score. And this was very helpful to be able to get public opinion through our online surveys. We had 3 online surveys in January 21, October 21, and March 22. We got a lot of comments, and they were all filtered and put into various bins of topics, and were actually very helpful for us to be able to get down to the fine tuning of our prioritization. So this is the final slide about our scoring. You could get a maximum of 20 points based on 5 for destination and equity, 7 for safety, 5 for connectivity, and 3 for the public input. And then those scores were broken down for the pedestrian plan and the ADA plan, and broken down one more time for the streets that are owned and maintained by the state and the streets that are owned and maintained by the city. Our highest ranking streets, so between 3 and 17 points, are on this map. As you can see, they're mostly really big arterial roads. You'll find our rush hours on these streets. Most of them are DOT-owned streets, with the exception of these 4. Patton Avenue being east of the Jeff Bowen Bridge. But Haywood Street downtown just received a new upgrade, so they might be able to be taken off the list at this point. And Lexington Avenue and Ashland. But with this rank of scores, the policies that we're wanting to consider are definitely working on the ADA upgrades and maintenance in these areas. Sidewalks should be wide and separated from the streets and on both sides of the road in these areas, and crosswalks should be enhanced for maximum safety of pedestrians. The next ranking is 10 to 12 points, and these roads, the type of the road starts to vary. Here are some examples. These are starting to look like roads that are coming off arterials and heading towards neighborhoods. And they also experience a lot of traffic, especially during rush hour. Some of them are already in some level of planning or funding for improvement. And then when you look at all of these lines downtown, most of these are representing ADA upgrades, not an entire sidewalk project. The policies that we need to look at for these streets also vary because the type of road varies, but they definitely need ADA upgrades and maintenance. We should be considering sidewalks on both sides of the road. But that can be looked at more granularly depending on the road. If we look at the safety score of these roads, maybe a sidewalk on just one side of the road would fit the bill. And then enhanced safety, pedestrian crossings, also depending on the safety score, can possibly or be unnecessary. Just we can make these streets safer without them. And as we get down to lower and lower on the ranks, you will see we're going deeper and deeper into the neighborhoods. These are definitely like the main streets of the neighborhoods. And they also vary wildly by style. These would be great projects to consider for a next round of sidewalk projects through a bond program, for example. These roads, with proper studies, could be very good streets to have shared roads instead of full-blown additional facilities. They could possibly be a neighborhood greenway, which I'll explain in a little bit. And then crossing and design standards, and also whether it needs one or two or no sidewalks really depends on the traffic data and the studies that we would need to make those determinations. And then ranking 4 and ranking 5, as you see, we're getting more and more into the neighborhoods, more and more into quiet streets. By the time you're down to the lowest ranking streets, we could probably use shared road design guidelines to answer our problems, but we won't know until we actually are able to study them. When I'm talking about design guidelines, I'm referring to the NACDO standards. That's a guidebook that is updated regularly, and it's written by the National Association of Traffic Officials, and it's considered the Bible of street designs in cities. Any questions?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Sandra, do you have any questions? I have a couple here. Okay. So Lucy, when you were doing this work and looking at destinations, what's considered sort of, a reasonable walk versus, is it a quarter of a mile? Is it a mile? Is it 3 miles? When you're thinking about destinations.
Good question. So a walk would be up to a mile, but we're also considering that people without cars would possibly take a bus from their neighborhood into the area where their destination is. So it's important to consider a quarter-mile walk to any bus stop from those destinations and what the facilities that connect them look like.
Okay. And when you were looking and prioritize and, make it, scoring, were you considering like a whole street? I mean, or did you kind of cut it up into pieces of a street?
So I will show you our prioritization list, which was the next thing
okay.
On my presentation, but this I think explains it better than I can.
Okay.
So we broke the roads down, and in the prioritization schedules, it will show you the segment that we're considering because, for example, Tunnel Road is such a long road, and it changes character, and the road type changes. So the segment will give you the parameters of the analysis, the score. It will also show next steps or any kind of studies that are underway now. It gives a pretty good project description. So in the project description, it might just say, this only needs ADA improvements, or there's several sidewalk segments that need to be filled.
Okay. And then later on down the road, are you going to talk at all about, I mean, one of the areas that, I've seen is like Long Shoals, which is more in, my neighborhood, and one that I walk and run on. But are you going to talk at all about right-of-way acquisition? Because it's my understanding that that's one of the big issues relative to actually making these sidewalk projects happen.
As the land acquisitions being an expensive part of the planning and implementation. I am not planning on touching on that, but we are very familiar with the idea of land acquisition being expensive. And quite frankly, every step of development is getting more expensive every day. The construction costs are through the roof. So it's all expensive, and it all takes a lot of time
Okay.
to develop. So I just showed you what I wanted to show of the prioritization list. There's several pages of them. There's a lot of information. So they are good to dive deeper.
It looks like a DOT project list.
It's very dry.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm familiar with that look from the MPO.
Leave it to transportation engineers. Well, moving on to the Greenway plan, it has a slightly different methodology. The first step that we took was looking at the existing Greenway master plan, and through a tool that our consultants made, we have the ability to kind of quickly determine if it's feasible to construct the corridors that are in our plan. So some of our corridors have been taken off because they are not very feasible to construct. And we did not feel like it's honest to leave a greenway corridor on a master plan when it would never be able to be built. So we've taken a few corridors out, 2 off the top of my head. And in addition to constructability, we did run a similar process as the pedestrian road corridors with destination and equity and the input that we received from the surveys. And we realized that we needed to come up with different types of greenways. Typology is the fancy word for it, but they were broken down into 4 groups. The spine greenway being like the highway of our greenway plan, and our natural surface trails being the very smallest. And I'll tell you a little bit about that. But this is a graphic that kind of, for me, helps me understand the different typologies a little bit faster. The Wilma Dykeman would be a good example of a spine greenway. Reed Creek and Glen Creek greenways are good examples of the arterial greenway. We don't have any neighborhood greenways yet. That's a new typology, and the natural surface as well. We finally have some greenway design guidelines that we'll be putting into our standards and specification design manual. And our spine greenways will be at least 14 feet when we can do that. The Wilma Dykeman is a 16-foot wide greenway when you combine the dedicated bike lane and the multi-use path. We also suggest that the greenway spines should have lighting on them and as much park amenities as you normally see, such as benches, trash cans, bike racks, things like that. And this is a list of our spine greenways. The ones in bold are the ones that have been prioritized on our list. But mostly I just, on these slides, thought that these maps are a quick view of what we're looking at. So with the spine greenways, we're hoping to achieve really good east-west and north-south connectivity with the idea that a lot of the spines are in rivers, river corridors, and so we expect to see a lot of people there recreating, a lot of tourists there, but also these spines will be very important for commuting on greenways. The arterial greenways will be slightly more narrow. They will also have some amenities that just won't be as razzle-dazzle as the spine greenways. So these are more, this one's around UNCA. These would be going into neighborhoods. This is what it looks like throughout the city. Again, the bold ones are the ones that have been prioritized on our list. And then the neighborhood greenway. We're not inventing these. We can find great examples of this style of treatment on our roads throughout the country and lots of North Carolina too. But the idea of a neighborhood greenway is to be able to convert the existing roadbed into something that can be more safely and easily shared with pedestrians and cyclists. And we've got a lot of them going into neighborhoods and then connecting to the arterial greenways. This is an example in Seattle, and these little shots of wayfinding are a very important part of being able to let people know how to get through the neighborhoods to the next greenway. So in order to do these kind of things, we just need to use very simple traffic engineering improvements to make big changes. So making better crossings, making slower speeds in neighborhoods, diverting traffic so that they will stay in a more regulated manner to the busier streets. Things like the wayfinding and branding will be important. It's going to be really important when we say that we're doing neighborhood greenways that we do our studies in each neighborhood because the context is so different throughout the city. I'll just skip that slide. Stay on time. So this is our list of neighborhood greenways. We've got some that are prioritized. Several of them could be temporary, sort of tactical urbanism that can give people an idea what having a neighborhood greenway on that street would look like. Thompson Street would be a great example of a road that could possibly be a tactical urbanism street.
And Lucy, can you explain tactical urbanism?
Oh, yes. So tactical urbanism is kind of a quick and dirty way to change the way the street is used by creating more narrow traffic lanes, for example, so that you have room for a wider sidewalk or dining area or a bike lane. So Cox Avenue was a tactical urbanism project, if you remember that a few years ago, and with very cheap ingredients like diverters, which are these little plastic things that look like armadillos, the lumps, or linear ones can be put in the road. Planters could also be diverters. They just keep cars in the traffic lane and then have a defined place that it isn't supposed to be driven on with a car. And it's a great way to try out an idea too, or use it for a weekend so the neighbor can get a sense of it, because they might not be able to understand a plan without actually being out and being able to walk it or drive it in their car to understand.
And Lucy, isn't tactical urbanism the idea that you're not really, you're not going in and actually changing a road. You're just kind of putting some things in there,
right,
as opposed to redesigning the whole road and either getting more right of way or reducing a lane size, whatever. I mean, permanently, it's more
Yeah.
just putting
Mhm.
some things in there to slow down traffic a lot of times.
Right. By its nature, tactical urbanism is typically a temporary thing, but some of them are up for, a year or whatever while communities are deciding to move forward or not with the design. So yes, we have come up with 8 neighborhood greenway pilot projects. We specifically chose one on each side of the city and then one that will take you around town. This one actually is under construction now, the Greenway Connector project. So we took these steps, looking at the importance of a network, the economic and community benefits, the construction readiness, and the public input that we received to come up with our top 10 Greenway priorities. And these are them. The ones that are in green are the spines. The ones that are in blue are the arterial greenways. And some of them are on the list because they have a certain level of design or funding available already. Some of them are just needed, but we don't have a clear path on implementation yet. 2 of them are rail with trail projects. One is going up the rail line that parallels Sweden Creek and Hendersonville Road. And the other is going from West Asheville down to the Inca Heritage Trail near the sports park. So the last component are the natural surface trails. We have been working with a group of about 15 nonprofit groups on an effort that we're calling Asheville Unpaved, where we are wanting to implement some natural surface trails. I hear it a lot. People really want dirt trails because they're faster, they can get them in, and they can make some really quick connections. That group looked at the entire city. This is an early working map and identified areas where there's large chunks of public land and what we could do with them. And we've come up with 5 pilot projects. This is one of them. It's on Mountainside Park or up where the Bowcatcher Greenway will be. There's more information on Asheville on Bikes webpage, and we have a story map on our project page with more details about the concept of Asheville Unpaved. Right now, we're taking our concept maps to different neighborhoods that are directly impacted by these would-be projects to share with them the idea, get their comments and concerns so that we can address them and fine-tune the plans a little bit more before we do a full-on citywide public engagement for Asheville Unpaved. But the idea will be that these partners will do the fundraising for these projects and hire the professional trail builder who will build them. These trails will be built at the utmost sustainable levels and the best guidelines for trails that can be built and easily maintained. And we're designing several types of trails in public areas. For example, on Mountainside, we have multi-use trails and then some that are dedicated just for mountain bikes. We have a lot of user conflicts on this mountain, and the trails that have been built are built poorly and eroding quickly. So an effort like Asheville Unpaved could really help with things like that. And this is a quick map that the Asheville Unpaved group made that kind of compares the locations of their pilot projects to our Greenway master plan to give you an idea of how it can also help with connectivity. Do you have any questions? Okay. This is the action plan. One action, three plans, one action plan for all 3. And in the action plan, we have 10 goals. We have the 3 plans, basic action plans, and then also added goals of additional safety, multimodal vision, the tools we need to make this happen, funding strategies, the policy changes we need to make, development addresses how to get these projects developed in an easy way, and equity. And the action plans are, the action plan is chapter 10 in the master plan. And in it, you will see several tables. Each one of the tables talks about one of the goals and will spell out the action that's needed, how you can measure it, what departments will need to be working on this with the transportation department, guess on how fast we can get these done, etc. But to make it easy for today, I've just developed bullet lists on our on the presentation for each goal. There's none of them are too surprising. They're kind of typical action plans, like upgrades to the UDO and to the SSMD, the design manual that we use in and we share with our developers to use. But we have some innovative ones, I think, such as the create a Keep It Clear program, where people are responsible for keeping the right of way along their property clear of debris, trash cans, also poison ivy, aggressive dogs, all the things that make it really hard to walk down your neighborhood street. I'm just quietly sharing this list of bullet points in case anything jumps out at you. One of the things that we'd like to do in the transportation department is develop a transportation equity plan for our department to help us define what equity in transportation means for the city of Asheville and transportation, and also metrics to be able to evaluate that. We need to create a e-device policy for our electric devices coming out now, e-bikes and e-scooters, which we're getting a lot of calls about. They're complicated, but very much needed at the same time. Tools would be several different types of apps. Some of them already exist and we just need to plug into them. Some of them are not existing yet, like a GAP dashboard similar to the capital projects, or an app for people to find accessible parking locations. Another one I like is promoting civility among all roadway users. We are having a lot of problems with people of all modes of transportation being pretty rude, and cars in particular drivers are using their cars as weapons on the road. And so figuring out a way to get us all to understand that our rights of way are for everyone to use, and how we can all just slow down and be nice to each other, that we really aren't going to waste too much time if we're just kind. So I did want to touch on the funding strategies with the elephant in the room. The ADA transition plan, there's one part of it that makes it an important thing. This is a plan that actually shows our community, people with disabilities, but also the Department of Justice, that we are making a good faith effort in upgrading our ADA facilities in our city and doing the best job we can to create a city that is accessible to all. And that plan will have to have a financial amount that we will be promising that we'll be using every year to make this happen. When cities are sued and have to go to court because of their ADA facilities, they typically walk out with a very hefty annual amount of recurring funds that they must put in if the Department of Justice tells them. So it would be in our best interest to move forward as best we can with a good faith effort of recurring funds that will show that we are trying to be the most accessible city that we can be in the mountains as we are. And that can be a combination of many things. One of the things that we're looking at right now is how much do we spend on an annual level? For example, our resurfacing schedule, how many ADA facilities are we improving while we're doing those projects? What about our capital projects? So once we have an idea of how much we're already spending, that will be the first start. We're also considering a full-time employee to be an ADA coordinator that could be addressing problems in multiple departments, our department, transportation, but also public works, the risk office, and DSD. Another topic is that the infrastructure bill that is now law on the federal level is, for the first time in a long time, having amazing grants being rolled out, and they'll be available for the next 5 years. So that, and on the state level, there is the Great Stale Trait Consortium that is working very hard to get grants available for greenways and trails. Asheville's Swannanoa Greenway is part of the Fonta Flora State Trail. So we're trying to find ways to be able to use the grants available to help us with that. And then also working with community partners like Asheville Unpaved can help us get a lot of things done quicker. Any questions about the action plan?
Looks like a lot of work.
Oh, yeah.
One other thing, I guess I would like to, add as an idea on the action plan, especially around funding, is to encourage our neighborhoods to give right-of-way or minimal costs relative to allowing sidewalks or greenways, et cetera. That, if we could get some of our neighborhoods to, for me, like Lakeshore, a lot of those folks have beautiful yards, and, allowing a sidewalk, from the street to back 15 feet wouldn't really cut down on their yard too much. But, if they charge us a lot of money, it's going to make this plan more difficult to implement. So I'm wondering if there's a way to encourage that kind of thing. If other cities, other municipalities have had any success around things like that, to, reduce or eliminate some, one of the big costs of these kind of things. So I guess I just ask if we could kind of put that in as an idea.
Noted. I've heard Wilmington has never had to buy an easement.
Really?
But that's hearsay. Now I'm just gossiping.
I would love to hear how they do that.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. Sandra, do you have anything?
Okay. Quick slide on our next steps. We'd like to come back to you in June. I'll give you an update on the ADA transition plan details and hopefully get your approval to come to council in July for adoption of the GAP plans. We also would like to identify priority action plan strategies to include for future work programs. Actually, we're already doing that in our own spare time. We're updating policies and design standards as recommended. There's a lot of need in the UDO and the SSDM for that. And then continuously seeking funding on all levels. So in June, we would like a recommendation that's we go to City Council to adopt the Greenway Master Plan, the ADA Transition Plan, and the Pedestrian Master Plan. That is the end of my presentation. It took me a little longer than 30 minutes.
Thank you, Lucy. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for your time.
So if Councilwoman Kilgore doesn't have anything, I'm going to go ahead and open it up to public comment. Okay, so the next we'll move to the general public comment. Callers will have 3 minutes to comment. At the end of 3 minutes, staff will ask you to wrap up your comment. Staff, do we have anybody in the speaker queue?
There's no one in the queue.
Okay, so since there's no one in the speaker queue, I will close public comment and adjourn the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucy. Thank you all. Have a
Thank
good
you.
evening. Bye-bye.
Bye.